Today, we're going to cover 5 tips, 5 things that you need to know, 5 things that you need to at least consider if you're going to retire early. Lots of folks out there are really interested in stepping out of their working careers and into some form of retirement before the full retirement age from Social Security, before we often like to think about this. And in our country, usually that's around mid 60s is when people think of their ordinary default kind of retirement age. Well, a lot of people want to step into retirement before that. And that's great. And if you're in a fortunate enough position to be able to do that, there are some pretty serious planning considerations that you need to think about. And in this video, we're going to cover my top 5. Now, starting off, health insurance is probably the big one that comes to mind first, because when most of us step into retirement, we think, well, we'll just enroll in Medicare after we walk away from benefits provided by our company. As you know, Medicare doesn't kick in until you're at least 65. So there's going to be a gap there. If you're going to retire at some point in your mid 50s, maybe you have 10 years that you need to consider here. Now, it's really, really important to get some kind of coverage. So, as you know, after you separate from your employer, you can get COBRA coverage and stay on the current health plan for up to 18 months. Now, that might mean that you're paying a lot more for it, because right now your existing health coverage costs something and your employer might be subsidizing a portion of those premiums. If you leave the employer, this is a law, a rule that requires employers and insurers to enable you to stay on that plan for 18 months, but you might have to pay 100% of the cost. So it might get a little bit more expensive. So before you really get serious about this, it's important to figure out what you're going to do for health insurance. Either start poking around on your state's exchange to understand what the costs are going to look like. Maybe go talk to a broker, because there are a lot of health insurance plans available through local brokers by insurers that do not participate in the exchange. They're not compelled to participate, and a lot of them don't. The whole point is to map this out beforehand, because that's going to be a substantial expense, and the landscape of healthcare changes a lot every single year. We have had some clients in the past use these health share programs that are a lot less expensive than traditional health coverage, and that's because they're not bona fide insurance. We've had some people use these successfully. They've had no complaints about them. Just know that if you use a health share program, it's not bona fide insurance, and they are not required to reimburse you for the expenses if they don't want to, because it's not a bona fide insurance policy. So that's the first thing to consider. Obviously, is health insurance. You have some COBRA coverage if you need it, but it's not going to last for longer than 18 months, and you won't be able to enroll in Medicare until you're 65. Now, the second thing is your withdrawal strategy, right? So right now, while you're working, you have income from your job coming in, you pay taxes on that. Maybe you park a little bit in the company 401k or retirement plan. Everything else is used to pay for living expenses. And when you stop working, the living expenses remain, but your income goes away, right? So hopefully you have some nest egg built up. If you're really considering retiring early, hopefully you're in a strong financial position and able to do that. Now, most of us think of this in terms of our retirement accounts. Well, I've been saving in that 401k for a long time. I've got a great balance in there. We've got a lot of debt paid off. We're in a good financial position. We want to retire early. It can absolutely work, but the caveat is that a lot of these retirement accounts have early withdrawal penalties, which you might be aware of. So in 401k plans and IRAs, in 403bs, if you take money out of those plans because you retired at 55, you'll owe income tax on the distribution plus a 10% penalty. And that's true anytime you take a withdrawal before 59 and a half years of age. So this is something to consider. Now, there are a couple ways around this, right? If you have a bunch of taxable investments that are not locked up in a retirement account, maybe those are the first that you dip into to take money out of the accounts, put it in your bank account, which enables you to pay your monthly retirement expenses. That's the first place that we like to look, even if you're in your mid 60s, are your taxable savings, taxable investments first. Now, there are ways to access your retirement accounts that are tax preference, tax deferred, like your 401k, without incurring that 10% penalty. One of them that's pretty popular is the concept of substantially equal periodic payments. What that means is that if you would agree to take a certain amount out every single year for at least 5 years, and you run this calculation that the IRS gives you, and you check a bunch of boxes, as long as you adhere to that calculation and take the same amount out every single year for at least 5 years, you can do so without incurring that 10% penalty. It's a little bit treacherous. You can screw it up and owe a lot of tax penalties if you do. So don't take that lightly, but there are ways to access your retirement accounts without paying that 10% penalty. So, number one, health insurance. Number two, really get a good foothold on what your withdrawal strategy and your retirement income strategy is going to be. Because if Social Security is going to be a big part of your retirement income strategy, guess what? You can't collect it at 55 anyway, right? So have a really bona fide plan for how and when you're going to take money out of your accounts, and how that's all going to work. Now, on that same note, Social Security planning is really important, because here's what happens if you retire at 55. You retire at 55, you've got your plan in place, things are going well. You get to 58, you get to 59, you get to 60. You notice maybe the value of your accounts going down, down, down because you're taking money out to pay for expenses. And if you're taking more money out of the accounts than the investment growth within the accounts, you're going to see the balances fall. And that's a little bit disconcerting if you're in your late 50s and early 60s. So, guess what? If you're eligible for Social Security, full retirement age for most people these days is 66 and a half, 67, something around there. You can file for benefits as early as 62. So every month before your full retirement age that you file for benefits and start collecting those checks, the benefit you get is haircut by a little bit. And if you retire when you're 55 and you're in the position, maybe you run into a bad market where you see your account balance falling little by little over those first few years of retirement, starts to get a little bit more appealing to file for Social Security at 62 when you didn't otherwise want to. So have a Social Security plan in place, have a withdrawal strategy in place, know exactly which accounts you're going to pull from and when, and do your best to stick to the Social Security plan that you put in place initially. Because remember, if your monthly benefit is $2,500 a month at age 67, which is your full retirement age, well, that's going to be a lot lower. It might be $1,500 a month if you file as early as age 62. So you get more checks by filing earlier, but they're substantially lower. And it's not like they just bump up and increase automatically when you hit 67. You're locking in a lower benefit for the rest of your life. So try not to deviate from your original Social Security plan, even though it's tempting for people who are retiring early, and the people we've worked with over the years. That often tends to happen. So health insurance, retirement income, Social Security. Number four, really scrutinize your debt before you make this jump. I'm not someone who thinks that you need to have your mortgage paid off before you step into retirement if you're retiring in your 50s or anytime before 65 or so, but you definitely want to have your credit cards paid off in full and down to zero. The interest rate on credit cards is 25, 30, I've seen 32, 33% even in this environment. And if you're someone that has a balance on the credit cards and you're just making minimum payments to service them, that interest is eating into your retirement, whether you know it or not. And it can be a killer for early retirement. So, what you want to do is set up a stable financial system, a stable net worth, a stable income plan that will set you up for financial success in retirement. And if a substantial portion of your income is going to service those credit cards, that can be a recipe for disaster 10 years down the road. So absolutely make sure your credit cards are paid off before you even consider retiring early. And I would even go as far as saying You absolutely should not retire in your 50s if you carry a balance on the credit cards. You have to get those paid off first. It can really, really go sideways on you otherwise. Now, that's 4. Number 5, the final thing you need to do here of our top 5 tips today, reassess your capacity for risk in your portfolio and think about rebalancing before making this jump. Here's what I mean by this. Someone who's in their mid 50s, who's planning on retiring at 65, has a reasonable capacity for risk. If you're 55 years old and you're going to retire in 10 years at 65, you have some time remaining to wait out a bad stock market if there's a market crash next week. Okay. So you probably don't want everything in stocks. You probably want some bonds and maybe some other asset classes in there to be kind of a ballast of the portfolio. But you have a fair amount of capacity for risk. There are decades in our stock market's history that have produced 0% or even negative returns. So 10-year stretches where the return in the S&P 500 was negative. But they're very, very rare, right? If you back up that timeline to 2 or 3 years, there are a whole ton of those stretches of time where the market's been down 20, 30%. So the closer you get to retirement, the more conservative you need to be. And if you're thinking about retiring early, think about the ramifications of this. You're probably adding substantially to your expenses because now you need to go find health insurance. You might be adding to your tax situation based on what your withdrawal strategy looks like, because you might be taking money out of accounts, paying capital gains or some kind of interest on taxable investments. If you're taking money out of your retirement accounts and substantially equal periodic payments, that's taxable income too, right? So your expenses might even be higher by retiring early. And if you're planning for a 30-year retirement when you retire at age 65, just to be conservative, let's say you live to age 95. Well, if you back that up by 10 years, now you have to plan for a 40-year retirement. So you're planning for a longer period of time. The first 10 years of that plan are going to be more expensive than if you'd waited another 10 years, because now you can get on Medicare. And the time until your retirement is a lot sooner as well. So this is a really good opportunity to reevaluate your capacity for risk and think about adding some to bonds. It's not a bad time to do it. Interest rates are a lot higher now than they have been in a very, very long time. And by diverting some of your equity portfolio to bonds, you're taking a little bit of risk off the table. You can get a halfway decent return, which wasn't the case 5, 8, 10 years ago when interest rates have been super low. And you're preserving the likelihood that you'll be able to stay retired over the rest of your life. Now, obviously, everybody's a little bit different. If you only spend $7,000 a month and you have $10 million in your portfolio, you probably take as much risk as you want without worrying about it, right? But those are 5 considerations that I think everybody needs to really look into before you decide to retire early. Make sure you know what's going to happen with your healthcare, what the costs are going to be. Make sure you know what your withdrawal strategy is going to be. What accounts are you going to pull from first? In what sequence? What are the tax ramifications? What other penalties do we need to be aware of? And how do we manage all that? Make sure you have a Social Security filing plan and you stick to it as best you can. Because again, it's tempting to file early once you kind of go along if you see your account balance falling a little bit. Our 4th one was make sure that you're scrutinizing your debt. Don't necessarily have to pay off the mortgage in full, but absolutely pay off the credit cards. And number 5, reevaluate the portfolio. Your risk capacity is probably quite a bit lower the earlier that you retire. Hope that was helpful, and we'll talk to you all again soon. I hope you liked today's video. If you did, make sure to hit the like button at the bottom of the screen and subscribe to the channel to make sure that you're notified anytime we come out with something new. On top of that, if you're not sure whether you're on track financially, you might want to check out our free wealth gauge assessment. There's a link for it in the comments. Basically, you click the link, you take 3 minutes to fill out some basic financial information about yourself. We take that information and run it through our financial planning software. Then we send you via email a short private video of our findings and 30,000-foot observations.